there, beautiful people. Hi there, hi there, hi there. And welcome back to Thinking Out Loud with Ru. To those who are just stopping by for the first time, my name is Rutendo. And this is a channel that I started to speak about some of the things that we experience as young adults, but from a lens of being a psychology student and also being a Christian. So most of the conversations that I will have are from that perspective. So please do bear that in mind when you do watch the videos that I produce. But thank you so much for stopping by, and I hope that you find this conversation useful to you and that you go back and you also watch all the different other videos that I have uploaded on this channel. And please do subscribe, leave a comment, and also like and share this video when you do find it helpful. Thank you so much for stopping by. To all those who are returning subscribers, I appreciate you 1,000,000%. I appreciate you. I appreciate you so much. So this week I was just like, let me continue on the series that I've started over the past 3 weeks. And it's just specifically speaking about trauma and how that impacts our emotions, and now how that impacts the narratives that we have of ourselves, of the experiences that we have gone through, and also of other people that we engage with and encounter in our lives. So I wanted to start by going into the definition of what narrative psych is. So it is a branch of psychology that is actually called narrative psychology. And I remember I came across it a few years ago and I got so excited. And the reason being, everything that excites me most of the times, I see it from my point of view in terms of some of the things that I've gone through. And I see patterns in my own life and I'm like, that is true. It makes sense because this is the lens that I've always had in my life. This is something that has always influenced my relationship in a specific way because I have certain beliefs and certain ways that I tell stories. And basically that's what narrative psychology is. It's how human beings make sense of the world around them and themselves through story, through narratives that they tell. And one of the things that I really notice about trauma specifically is that it's not about the traumatic event, because technically there are a lot of people who are exposed to really gory events, to things that will literally scare the living daylights out of you, but sometimes they come out of it unscathed. And why is that? It's because of the narratives that we tell that may be able to sort of foster a place of resilience. And sometimes some of the narratives that we tell are not always positive. Sometimes they can be quite negative and they can keep us in a space of struggling emotionally to even visualize the possibility of another day. And that's basically what narratives are. So it's the stories that people construct to understand and to organize their experiences, memories, and their identities. That is a loaded sentence. Our identities can also be contained in that. The way that we even go back into the past and see the things that we went through can also be impacted by the stories that we tell in our minds. And I even see it in my own family in terms of when we speak about some of the experiences that we had with my sister and just going back into the past and retelling stories. Sometimes two people can have two completely different visions of what happened. And it's because our memories and our experiences are filtered through the narratives that run throughout our entire lives. And we begin to see it as we grow older. Those narratives that we tell about ourselves become more clear. But when we're younger, they're not as clear, and we don't see it as openly as we see it when we're older, that we see life in a specific way. So I see narratives as those those glasses that we wear, and that everything that we see is filtered through those lens that we're seeing life through. And that's basically why this form of therapy, narrative therapy, excited me. Because like I said, two people can experience exactly the same events. It's the research that is done with twins. Two kids, same DNA, born in the same home, same exposure to the same family structures, and yet they might come out differently. Why is that? It's because of how we tell stories, how we relate to the experiences that we're actually exposed to. And I find that very interesting. And I think it is worthy of being looked upon a little bit more closely by each and every person and in their own lives as well. Because we deserve to live healthy lives. But in order for us to do that, we need to first see what are some of the narratives that we hold that might not always be the most beneficial in our lives. And I wanted to also emphasize that when it comes to narrative therapy, we look at the internalized and evolving stories that people tell about themselves that a person constructs to make sense of their lives. But narrative therapy itself looks at challenging problematic narratives that people create and trying to get people to create more empowering narratives that can change the course of their lives from one to another. And like I mentioned before, when it comes to trauma shapes the narratives that we have. So it can change how we see life entirely, and it can change how we initially constructed narratives. And that's why trauma is something that is very powerful. But again, sometimes people can also have protective factors that can buffer the trauma from getting to a point of changing the narratives that you've had. And maybe that's a good topic for next week that I can go into. But I wanted to go into how to reframe or changing some of the unhealthy narratives that we can develop. And to make it a little bit more of a practical conversation, I think for me, some of the narratives that I had that I developed unintentionally, but as a way of just coping with trauma, was struggles specifically around people and my position in people's lives. I am a person who, at some point in my life, it was easy for me to walk away from relationships. Very easy, way too easy. I'm okay-ish, very easy, in a way that is unhealthy, because it would be relationships that are healthy to a large extent, but because of conflict, you get to a point of just saying that, because I know loss, maybe I shouldn't get too close. Maybe it's okay for this relationship to end now before it even gets too deep, because you're just trying to protect yourself from experiencing even more hurt and more pain than you've experienced in the past. So that was me. And the narratives that I told was a little bit more protective of me, that maybe it's not worthy investing into relationships because relationships end anyway. Maybe I should just walk away before people walk away from me. And those are some of the narratives that I told. But in other people's lives, some of the unhealthy narratives that I've seen is things like, maybe if a person grew up in a household where the parent wasn't always as reliable as a parent should be in order for a safe attachment to be developed, where people are just like, I'm not worthy of loving, or I am not worthy of good things because maybe they experienced sexual assault, and you start to associate that with something that is within you that is attracting something that bad. Or saying that I don't deserve good things because you've experienced a household where love was withheld from you, where food was withheld from you, where basic needs were withheld from you. So you start to believe that you don't deserve good things simply because that's been something that was conditioned within you over time, and eventually you started to believe that narrative. But I do think that even the unhealthy narratives, they can be changed. And that's the whole entire point of therapy. Because even though, yes, sometimes individuals, when they're a little bit more grown, they might have that self-awareness to be able to identify unhealthy narratives, it's not everyone who is able to identify that. Not because they don't want to, but because sometimes our brains are very, very constructive in how they do things. Sometimes for our survival, our brains can hide certain information from us in a way of just wanting to make us functional, in a way of just wanting to make us be able to survive some of the things that we may be exposed to on a day-to-day basis. So it's not you. Sometimes it's just your brain trying to help you to survive. And that's why we then develop some of those narratives that then guide our behavior, but we might not always be aware of it. But sometimes having a second party who is divorced from you, who is separate from you, they can now look at how you tell stories, and they might be able to see a theme in a way that you tell stories and use that to be able to get you to a point of identifying how did that influence your behavior, or how did that influence how you handle relationships. Are you able to identify that pattern? So the first thing in terms of reframing or changing narratives is being able to actually identify the narratives that you tell about yourself, and the narratives that you sort of see your world through. That's the first step of being able to change narratives, because you can't change a narrative that you don't know exists. And again, like I said, sometimes that's the point of therapy, being able to be in a space where other people are able to see that. And I think also relationships, that's the beauty of relationships, because sometimes the people in our lives are able to say that, listen, Rutendo, you're always reacting in the same way when I say this. Or when you are feeling this way, I see the same emotional behavior from you. And sometimes it's us being okay with receiving feedback, okay with receiving how people also receive us, so that we can use that information as a way of getting us to sort of work on some of the things that we're experiencing. So it's a journey, but I think sometimes we should also be open to seeing how other people see us, so that we can use that feedback as a way of constructively working on ourselves. And the second thing that I wrote here is it's important to identify and elicit different descriptions of the same event. So what I mean by that is that some of the traumatic experiences that we undergo, and it doesn't even have to be traumatic, sometimes it could be the same type of event that is evoking a similar emotion within us, and eventually we start to tell stories, specific stories, similar stories about ourselves based on recurring events. And we need to look at we need to look at things that challenge the narratives that we've always told. So for example, I gave the example of the person who maybe grows up in an unstable environment where certain things are withheld from them, and they start to believe that I don't deserve good things, and it becomes the narrative where they experience that, or the person who was sexually assaulted, and they start to believe that they attract bad things happening to them. So one of the ways of challenging a narrative would be asking questions around, okay, is there a moment where something good happened, where you attracted something good? Because if you're going to challenge a description of oneself, it means that you need to create a space where you can look at, are there moments in my life that demonstrated something different about myself, that challenged that core belief that I hold about myself, that I am unlovable? Is there a moment in time where a person really showed me love, and where a person loved me and I didn't expect it? Because sometimes we need those contradictions to literally get us to a point of questioning some things that we believe about ourselves. And I recently watched this show on Netflix called Adolescence. And this little boy, I don't remember if it was between 11 or 13, but between that, this little boy was just like, I am ugly. And because I'm ugly, that's the reason why I've never been in relationships. And because I am ugly, other people also perceive me as something that I believe. And because of these perceptions mixed with ideas of masculinity versus femininity, and how both are supposed to engage in the context of relationships, he ended up killing this girl that he wanted to be with, but she didn't see him that way. In fact, she actually bullied him to a certain extent, but he was trying to reclaim the word, I am a man. And you could see conflicts whenever he was engaging with a female, that he was trying to establish himself as a male, but there was toxicity in that, and wanting to reclaim masculinity within that. But it all comes from, how do you view relationships? And even the psychologist within this film, a brilliant film, by the way, I do recommend it. You could see that she was trying to understand, where did these narratives of masculinity come from? And maybe that could impact the narrative therapy or the therapy in general, by being able to challenge that. But I do think that part of being able to challenge or change narratives is by challenging them, put them in the court of law, to be able to see, okay, so what are some of the experiences that you had that validated this narrative? Because narratives don't just develop out of nowhere, they develop from somewhere. And it's important for us to be curious as to what contributed to these narratives actually developing, and creating a space where you're able to question, okay, what other experience did you maybe encounter that challenged this idea that maybe you're not handsome, or this idea that you're not lovable? Because that's what contributes to the discomfort of, oh, maybe this narrative is not the truth. Because I think that when it comes to narratives, most of the times it's based on trauma and emotion. And it's based on specifically feeling helpless and feeling fear and feeling terror about a specific situation. And it becomes something that is just helping you to survive, or helping you to understand the world around you. But it's based on that helplessness, fear. It's based on what we are terrified of. That's what drives the narratives that we tell. So if we can get to a point of being able to look at the emotions that contributed to narratives forming, and get to a point of challenging through other experiences that we've had, challenging the narratives that we have encountered, then we can get to a point of changing them. Because I do think that narratives get us to a point of not seeing life in the gray, but seeing life as black or white. And it's all based on experiences that we've went through that literally solidified how we see ourselves. But it doesn't mean that you haven't gone through other experiences that challenge what you've told yourself about yourself. and about the world that you're living in and about the people that you engage in. But your memory is just fixed on those experiences that validate or that assert that narrative that you have. And sometimes it may take other people in your lives to be able to remind you of other experiences where you experience something that challenged the narrative. And that allows you to get to that point of seeing that, no, based on the facts, based on other experiences that I've had, that narrative about me is not true. I am indeed lovable. I am indeed handsome according to so and so. So yes, there was one person who may have called me ugly. And maybe yes, they were just joking around, or maybe they thought so. Or maybe it was based on the fact that it is subjective and not an objective statement. But there is a person who finds me handsome in a romantic sense. There's a person who finds me beautiful. But sometimes it means that we need to be open to having conversations about things that go through our minds when people are not talking in the conversational state, in the conversational stance. But yeah, so that is today's episode. Join again next week. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please do note that I upload every single Thursday at 10 a.m. So watch out for notifications on videos that I'll be posting, and I hope you will be able to watch the next one. So thank you again. Stay blessed. See you next time. Bye for now.